Hello, everybody, and
Hello.
welcome to Summer Somos Fun Club. We missed you guys last week. I'm Martina.
I'm Elicia. We're super happy to be with you today.
Yes, Elicia is coming back from 2 weeks of conferences, so you guys haven't seen her since, what was the last assessment? Was the last one that you were here for?
Yep.
Okay, and so then 2 weeks ago, you were at GPRS working with hundreds of teachers there, and we did. We had a novels fun club with Carrie Toth and Christy Placido. Last week, both Elicia and I were at IFLT in St. Petersburg, Florida. So we missed you because we were working with people live and in person, and we are back for Storyasking.
We are super, super excited. And for everyone who took the time to come up and tell us how much they appreciate it, thank you. Because I don't know if you know this, but it's weird to sit in an office and talk to a computer screen and not really know what's happening. So I really, really appreciate those positive feedbacks. We do because we really do want this year to be better or best for you. That's my motivation in doing all this work. And I'm pretty sure it's Martina's as well.
Yes. Yeah. And we're always, we have so many ideas about the different ways that we can support teachers that are switching over to comprehension-based instruction generally and SOMOS specifically. And so we never really know until we get into it and get running with one of the ideas if it's really supporting you in a way that you feel is supportive. So we're so glad that we're really getting some positive feedback about the Fun Club, and I'm so glad to know that this is helping you to feel confident launching into this coming year. So with that, we are tackling one of the most daunting aspects of SOMOS, and also one of the funnest, and that is story asking. And today, Elicia is going to really take the lead on this Summer SOMOS Fun Club session because she has been a total machine doing this specific presentation that she wrote in reflecting on her experience mentoring our SOMOS teachers. So I'm super excited.
All right. So for everyone who's out there, thank you. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Martina. Martina's going to be the slide bumper today.
Oh, yes. Okay.
There's some resources for you, and we'll tell you this again, but there's a handout, there's a video, and there's like an observation sheet that you can download if you go to bit.ly/storyasking solutions. It's all lowercase. For those of you who want professional development credit, there is a form now that you can fill out that is bit.ly/uppercase SOMOS, lowercase, Summer Fun Club, uppercase PD. So that's for you guys.
And that's just for a certificate. We don't have it lined up with any official college credit or anything. But if you just need a certificate to be able to show to your administrators in order to get credit for professional development at the end of the summer, which is just a few weeks away, we'll be issuing those certificates to anybody that requests them after having filled out that form. And just a quick reminder, we can't see with the platform that we use to film this talk show format, we can't see who is making comments. All we can see is that what the comments say. So hello to whoever saw us both at IFLT, and hello to everybody. We're super excited to be here. If you want us to address you by name, just drop your name in the actual comment when you make it.
All right, let's get started. Everything that I'm going to talk about is on the handout. So today we're going to go over how to use the script, just like the one that you're going to see in SOMOS. We're going to review the basics of what it means to ask a story, because for a lot of people, it's not review, it's going to be new information. We're going to talk about how to establish procedures, because that's where it goes off the rails for most people, how to manage responses, and then how to do the technical stuff of keeping track of details when you've got different sections doing the same story, and how can you make writing it up for tomorrow or the next day that you see the kids a little bit easier and faster. So that's what we're gonna be talking about. So first, just to ground us, GPRS stands for Teaching Proficiency Through Reading and Storytelling. It's an input-based methodology that's very specific. It has 3 steps. The first one is establish meaning. In SOMOS, that's usually the first day of lesson plans, where you give the core vocabulary. You maybe do some translation sentences, maybe you assign gestures, maybe you do some personal questions and answers. The second step is asking a story, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The third step is reading the story, and that's all of the rest of SOMOS, which is awesome. All right.
And I wanted to jump in and just say that with the established meaning, for me, the established meaning day, which like Elicia said, that's usually like the first day of lesson plans. You define the core vocabulary for students. We do some practice sentences for translation, a few simple yes and no questions, and then the PQA. That is more drawn out than it has to be. You could just establish meaning by just saying, this is what the words mean, the core vocabulary, and then move on to the story asking. So that's something that you'll kind of find out what your personal comfort and I don't know, what you like doing is.
Another place that you can personalize it for yourself.
Yes.
All right. So there's 2 different ways to ask a story. One of them is to just freewheel it. Next. And then for...
I'm highlighting, not flipping.
Oh, exciting. The next...
now I'm...
the rest of us use a script. And there are scripts in almost every SOMOS unit. There's a couple that don't have full scripts for various reasons, but it's really easy to come join our group and say, does anybody have a script for the unit that doesn't? So next slide. This is how you use a script. We've got a little delay. So in a script, the bold words are your core vocabulary. You want to say those words pretty much exactly as written, unless you're making a choice not to. Underlined words are details that you can ask. Go ahead.
And I think it was Ann Mataba that came up with this style of writing scripts.
And they're also available in Look, I Can Talk, or Jim Tripp scripts called Tripp scripts, I believe. So this is an example, and it's really tiny, and I'm sorry about that. But if you open up any unit, there you go. You can see that the text, first of all, it says story script. The second thing is that it's got words that are underlined. Charlotte is a very intelligent girl. So in that script, you can change Charlotte. The second line is, she is a student at Clark Middle School. What you want to change is Clark Middle School. One day she walks to Clark Middle School. Walks is bold. That's one of the pieces of core vocabulary. So I want to show you what it looks like when you actually ask the story. Go ahead and go to the next. Oh, actually, would you slide over, Martina, so we can see all of the details to change?
There we go.
So for me, the details to change in the script are the name of the character, the characteristic. Sometimes I use intelligence, sometimes I want a different one. The name of the school. In the story, there's a special person, and who that person is in the story is Justin Bieber, which is funny, but I let my kids pick who the special person is, and that special person's attributes. So maybe they're a famous singer or a famous guitar player or something, some kind of attribute.
Another fun thing to do is to make it not be a person, but it could be an animal. And so things like dinosaurs and unicorns and zombies and fun characters like that are really engaging to bring in as well, and to kind of train your students to offer those kinds of things up as options as well.
Now, we're not really talking about why we do this. And this is just occurring to me. We're asking stories because it's part of TPRS, but also because it's super memorable and you are co-creating this story with your students. So suddenly, instead of the story being about Charlotte, it's about a kid in your classroom or somebody that they've decided they want the story to be about. So I'd like to show you an example of what this story looks like from Martina's script to what it looks like in my classroom after I co-created it with my students. So here it is in English. Just going to give a second for those of you who do not speak Spanish. Thank you for being part of our group. I hope that you feel welcomed here. All right, let's go on. So in this, the new details that I asked, remember these were underlined words. The name is Stephie. The kids came up with that. She's a muchacha. She's a girl. She is intelligent. She goes to Kentucky school. The special person is Parker Pillow. That was a kid in our class who had a lot of charisma. And his special attributes were that he was a famous singer.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, and this story only really uses the words walks, runs, and sees. So I just inserted these details to make a new script. And go ahead and go to the next slide so that I can show you what it looks like in English. Stephie is a very intelligent girl. She is a student at Kentucky school. One day, she walks to Kentucky school and sees a very special person. Again, the words that we don't want to change are walks and sees, and later in the script, runs. Okay? So I just want to pause there. It's all right. Are there any questions about how to use a script that we can address right now? Because we're going to move on from scripts to managing the whole thing.
While we're waiting for any questions to pop up, I'll just say, so the story script is something that your students will never see it. So the story script is something that's provided in the lesson plans. It's kind of your outline from the story that you're asking, but your students are never going to see the Charlotte is a girl. You are going to be asking leading questions so that they come up with the story themselves, and all they ever see is this version of the story that they've created based on their ideas and the people in their class.
Awesome. The other piece is I still hold my script most of the time when I ask a story. The kids see that I have an outline, I have a guide. They just don't know what it is, so it's all a surprise. I see that there's a question, are we sharing the PowerPoint? Better than that, I'm sharing a handout which has all of the information in an easy to print, black and white, easier to read and bullet pointed form, organized just like this. Okay, and that's in the bit.ly Storyasking
support. Yep. And I think we shared the link in the comments already, and we'll be showing it again in the slideshow.
Yes. So the next question I see is, are the scripts in a natty? So this is for Somos. So these are in Somos.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I don't believe a natty doesn't really have scripts. A natty has different kinds of lessons. So all of these scripts that you're going to be seeing in here, we're talking about from Somos, but there are similar styles of scripts that you will find in a lot of different places. One of which are Ann Matava's Story Scripts Volumes, which is a great resource. And that was how I kind of learned how to write scripts like these. And then, like Elicia already said, Jim Tripp's scripts, and then Look, I Can Talk, and to some extent, the Cuenta May books as well. So lots of places that you can get more scripts, but we're talking specifically today about the ones in Somos.
And this particular one that you're seeing is Somos 1, Unit 2. So I decided to just keep it super, super simple. All right, let's move on. So when you're asking a story, there's three kinds of, there's kind of three sentences that you're going to make. One of them is a statement. And I'll go into what this means. So once there is a girl, that's a statement. Okay. You don't know who the girl is. That's fishing for details. Who is the girl? What is her name? Then there's differentiated questions, also known as circling questions or triangling questions if you've been to a GPRS books training. I like the term differentiated questions because I think it gets a little bit more to the heart of what it is. I am asking, is there a girl or is there a boy? Is there an animal or is there a girl? The statement is, there is a girl. What is the girl's name is the fishing question. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
So both the statements and the fishing questions are moving the plot forward. So sometimes you're moving the plot forward by making statements, and sometimes you're moving the plot forward by asking a question that the answer is going to give you a detail, which you will then incorporate into the story with a statement. And with the circling and the triangling questions, Elicia, one thing, because I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't circle. Circling has historically been, it feels very mechanical, and it has been kind of a hang up for people. So when we talk about circling, which is asking, like Elicia said, those differentiated questions about a single statement. So you make a statement, there is a girl. Then you say, is there a girl or is there an animal? Is there a girl? Yes, there's a girl. Is there an animal? No. And you keep asking questions about it. Well, we're asking questions not for the sake of asking questions. And really, we're not even asking those questions for the sake of repeating the words. We are asking questions to support our learners' comprehension. So when we make a statement and it has some new words in it for our students that they don't feel like they don't hear it instantly and understand what it means, asking those questions helps them to process that statement that we've just made and to clarify their understanding in their head. And so that is the purpose of asking those questions.
That's so perfect. Thank you. I'm rapidly taking notes as she's talking, guys, just so you know. You also might ask some personalized questions because that brings the kids in. Is there a girl? Yes, there is a girl. What is her name? Her name, and then you get some ideas for names. Her name is Charlotte. Her name is Stephie, whatever you decide. Her name is Martina. Then what is your name? And at the end of this, I have a video that you can see how I weave in all of those questions in a beginning class to kind of work that in. So you can actually see this piece, okay? And then the other things that you're gonna say include things about brain breaks and management, okay?
So the statements and those differentiated questions are moving the plot forward and supporting comprehension. And then the personalized questions are creating connections. Those personalized questions are not intended to move the plot forward. They're not even necessarily about the story. They're just making that story, they're connecting the story to your students and creating connections between your students, between you and your students, and between your students and the world.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk about statements.
I like that.
So when you make a statement, one way to help the kids understand the difference between a statement and a question, and both English and Spanish have very clear cues. When we make a statement, the tone of our voice goes down. So say it like you mean it. There is a girl. If you say it like you mean it, then kids understand that that's a fact. And it's really important as you're moving the story forward that you establish the facts. So statements establish facts. So in our story about Stephie, is there a girl or an animal? There's a girl. Class, there is a girl. Okay.
And one thing that some teachers use as a cue, and myself being one of them, is that when I make a statement and when I say it like I mean it, I have my students say, oh, or ah, or some cue that I can kind of, sometimes they'll do it on their own and sometimes I make them do it to me, but that reinforces the idea that, okay, this is now part of our story. This statement belongs to the story. It's a real, this is a fact.
And it really helps, now it helps establish what kids can and can't argue about.
Yes.
Because once you've made the statement, now not everybody is comfortable oohing and awing or having their kids ooh and ah. They feel like it's inauthentic, and that is totally up to you. The challenge then becomes find another way to cue your kids to know when you've established a fact by making a statement. For me also, it's ooh, because I expect them to respond to everything that I say as if it is the most interesting thing they've ever heard. And
because everything that you say is the most interesting thing we've ever heard.
Absolutely. And I sure expect them to act like that. Okay, so those are statements. The next thing we have are questions. The first type of questions that we have are our circling or triangling questions or our differentiated questions. These are statements about facts. Students already know the answers because you made a statement. Now, here's the deal. You can ask too many of these questions. We've all done it. You can make them repetitive. You can make them boring or predictable. And that's the biggest problem with the term circling. Okay. However, asking questions gives kids the opportunity to process and to establish meaning and to connect meaning. If the kids are responding quickly, immediately, and confidently, you don't have to ask as many questions about that statement. And I think that's something that teachers forget. I know I've forgotten that a lot. If they know the answers, I don't need to ask as many questions. Then they're ready to get more language. I can add in new details. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that can't be stressed enough, that like it is, that asking too many questions is a huge problem. And so you're only asking questions to allow that processing time to support their understanding. And if they don't need it, then don't ask the questions, just move on to the next thing. And then I do want to revisit, because it looks like there's a couple comments about the oohing and aahing. So we want to reiterate, it's totally 100% a personal choice. If it feels weird and uncomfortable to you, don't do it. If you like it, do it. And for me, I use it with my, I've used it with elementary kids. I've used it with middle school kids. I've used it with high school kids. I've used it with adult learners. And because it feels natural to me when I'm teaching, I think that when my students are, no matter what age they are in a class with me, it feels like a fit for my style of teaching. But if it doesn't feel like a fit for you, no matter what age it is, then don't do it.
And I would agree. I taught adults last week in the teaching lab at ISLT, and I'm not sure if I consciously taught them or just expected them, and they did, and it was super, super cool. And these were adult beginners. They enjoyed it.
Alicia, someone asked, when asking questions, do you pick one student to answer, or do you want the whole class to respond?
What a good question. Can we park that? Because I'm going to talk about it. Totally. Because that's a really important question. In general, choral response, but we're going to come back to that. Okay, the other kind of questions that you ask are fishing questions, and these questions add details and move the plot forward. Students don't know the answers to these questions. They are
and neither do you.
And neither do you. So these are the words that are underlined in the script. There is a girl, her name is, what is her name? And then you have to fish for details. That's why we call it fishing. And then you decide. Now, that part, that's the hardest. So I'm going to talk about all kinds of ways that you can manage responses and decide. Let's go ahead and move on to the next, because I'm going to show you some pieces. So just to review, there's two types of questions. There's differentiated or circling questions that students already have the information to answer. They know the answers. You're asking either to give them more input, to make sure they understand, to check for comprehension. You're these are often used to get more repetitions for core vocabulary, but that is not how I use them. I'm not intentionally trying to get more repetitions. I'm just trying to make sure that kids understand what I'm saying. Then there's fishing questions. These questions add details. Students don't know the answers. I don't know the answers. And these help move the plot along. Okay?
And those are what makes that's what makes it really fun, when you get to come up with creative ideas together.
And then the students start to own the story, and it becomes their story and their community. And suddenly everybody has these in-jokes, and everybody remembers when Mateo jumped up on the chair because it was supposed to be a cliff or whatever it was. You're starting to create these community experiences, and it's amazing. It doesn't require a lot of creativity from you, okay? In fact, it requires none. You can let the students put the work on them, and let's talk about how. All right. So first, those are my kitties. Are there any comments or questions about the three kind of statements that you're going to make? Do I let students answer in English? Absolutely, I do. And I'm going to model, I'm going to show you guys how I do it so that it stays controlled. Because they don't speak Spanish yet. How can they suggest interesting things?
Yeah.
So, Kelly says that story asking is her favorite activity. Thank you so much. It's mine too. That doesn't mean that it's not exhausting and challenging.
Yeah. It's my favorite activity on a day where I have energy.
Yes. All right. So let's move on to procedures. This is a big deal, guys, because this is where it can really fall apart. And it has definitely fallen apart for me many times because I haven't taught my procedures well enough, and I haven't reviewed them well enough. I review my story asking procedures before I ask a story every single time. Most days I review procedures for how to be in Spanish class because they forget, and because I'm asking different things of them. And I'm going to show you what my procedures are. The other piece is that I teach the kids how I want them to respond, and I cue them how to respond, and I cue them when to respond. Okay? It's really, really important for me. I teach and I review and I cue. Next slide.
Teach, review, cue.
Practice. I just want you guys to sit with this for a second. Teach it. Practice. Practice more. Do not accept anything less than exactly what you want. Because as soon as you let somebody talk over you or do something, a behavior that is undesirable, everyone's going to assume that that's okay. Now, you choose for you what is desirable. Some teachers love it when the whole class is shouting out. Some teachers need it to be very, very structured. It's totally up to you. But part of what I think is my work as a teacher is to figure out what it looks like for me to do my best job, especially in story asking. Next. So the first thing I suggest is that you decide on your silent cue. Okay? This is really important for safety, first of all. If you have to evacuate the building, you need the kids to be quiet and look at you. So this is just a general safety thing, but also this is how you get them to focus. So whether you're doing a break, whether you're deciding on a detail, whatever it means, deciding on your silent cue is really important. I have a couple. I know one teacher who's super, super short. Like she's like 4'1". She's a really tiny human. She has a rug, and she has trained her students that when she stands on her rug, they are silent and looking at her. It's so cool. For me, I have chimes. And I also have a call and response. So my first recommendation for you is before you start story asking, figure out how you're going to get the kids silent, because they get so excited, you need a way to bring them back. And a lot of high school teachers maybe think that the kids will just do it. I think, from what I've observed, that they need to be explicitly taught your expectations.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Next. So
really quick, one question that we can jump in. Someone asked if this works for a first year CIer, and I would say yes. Story asking is not the easiest thing that you can do as a new CIer, but it was the first thing that I did. Like the very first day that I decided to get away from my textbook and try CI, I did story asking. So 100% yes, you can do this as a first year CIer.
Likewise. I'd like to address Audrey's question. They always want to speak in English. Yes, I understand. And I have some ideas for how to support them and you in working through that. Far-fetched, off-the-walls answers. So those are things, I have some ideas. For me, it's cute answers. And we can talk about different ways to open the field or limit the field. Mm-hmm. Because you can control that. And then as far as I don't know the translation for that, oh yes, that's the story of my life. I don't know how to say that. So there's magic Google, or there's nope, not that one, another one. It's okay. Yeah. It's okay to not know all the words. So for me, my limitation is cute answers, so that I teach middle school, so there's always a lot of blood and guts and death and dismemberment, because that's what middle schoolers are into, apparently. I think it's developmental. So if I let them go that direction, it's a real treat and the story's extra memorable. But generally, I want like unicorns and ponies and kittens in my class. And that's for me. Okay, I see another question that says, last year I used Look, I Can Talk and taught with the script in my hands, but Somos doesn't have questions scripted for you. Do you want to talk about that, Martina, or would you like me to?
Yeah, so we showed you the script that we had ahead of time, and the questions are not written out, but you just are looking for the underlined portions, and you do have to kind of come up on your own the question that would elicit that kind of a detail. And so that's something that you could just sit down before class, and it is so important that you read the script a couple times before you get into class, even if you're holding it in your hand. So just as you're reading through it, just think in your head, like, okay, what kind of a question could I ask that would get this kind of an answer? So in the case of, if the name is underlined, the question is, what is her name?
Mm-hmm. Myrna is asking if I have an explicit procedure for story asking. Yes, and I'm going to get there in just a second. And I have a downloadable piece for you as well. Okay.
And yes, explain the rules of story asking in English.
Oh, always, always, always for me. And I do have a video of what it looks like linked in the story asking supports bit.ly link that you can watch me actually review the procedures with my kids. It's probably the 4th story that they've done with me when that video was taken. All right, so let's talk about what procedures to teach. For me, it's goals. No, that's perfect. Some teachers use the word expectations. I learned this from Lori Clark, and I really like the word goal better. So these are my goals. Go ahead. Next. Listen with the intent to understand. And I tell them it, and then I have them put it in their own words. What does it mean to listen to understand? One person speaks, the others listen. Really important. For me, do your 50%. To me, that means play the game. If I say that there is a frog on my desk, see guys, here's my frog. Everybody says, ooh, it's the best frog ever. That's playing the game and responding to all my questions. So there's no sitting back and passively, they can respond non-verbally. That's fine, but they must respond. They can't just sit back. And that's hard for kids. Yeah. Because we don't expect that of them in many other classes. And traditionally, that is not what is expected of them in language. So that's hard. Signal if I am not clear. Okay, if I use words that they don't understand, I ask them to signal. However, middle school girls are never going to tell me if they don't understand something. So that's where those differentiated questions come in and those comprehension checks where I'm asking, which is why they have to respond to all of my questions.
And that thing, I would say the signaling one, there's a couple different signals that you'll see kind of commonly used. For me, I really reinforce that to my students, and I celebrate whenever someone tells me that they didn't understand, because that is what helps me to make sure that I'm staying comprehensible to my students. And I always did this signal. There's a sound and a verbal cue. Although I've heard that this is not maybe a nice gesture somewhere, so I think some teachers don't like to use it. Yeah, in Russian. Okay, yeah. So Michelle Whaley, that explains that Michelle Whaley goes woo, like over my head, like zoom.
I do this as well.
Okay.
For that reason.
So yeah, so for me, it's like I already I'm a creature of habit, and I've had a really hard time stopping doing this one once I learned. But yeah, so I like to have a signal that I can hear and see, because you kind of as the teacher, you get caught up in the story, and so you really need a student to like stop you, which is also why it's a really big ask for them, like Elicia said, and why those questions are so important.
So I established this. It's my goal that they signal. But I also work around the fact that they're middle schoolers. Tracking the speaker is something that culturally you have to be aware of. In the culture that I teach, and I make accommodations, but I want them at least to have their shoulders pointed towards the speaker. Doesn't have to be their eyes. In some cultures, it's very disrespectful to look into people's eyes. So making eye contact is not okay. It's not okay for me to ask that of them. It is, I think, okay for me to ask that their shoulders follow. And that's important. And then support the flow. And that's the catch-all. If we're telling a great story and a kid blurts something out random in English, that's not supporting the flow. If a kid bursts out something randomly in Spanish, also not supporting the flow. So let's pause here. And I see we've got a lot of questions. So let's go back to number one. Do I explain these in English? Absolutely. They don't speak Spanish yet. So for me, it would not be a good input. It wouldn't be a good use of my time to try to mime what I need. We do it in English, and we do it explicitly, and then I have them put it in their own words, because the kids can like parrot what my rules are or my goals are, but then I want them to put it in their own words in our shared language. Another question is, how do I hold everyone accountable for responding? I look at them. And I do it again, and I practice it, and I practice it, and I don't accept anything less than what I want, which is everyone responding. And so again, it doesn't have to be verbal, but I need them to respond. Now, if I know a kid has had a really bad day, and I hopefully know because I've checked in with them at the beginning of class, I greet everyone at the door, then I'm not going to hold them accountable for responding because they might burst into tears. So that comes into knowing my audience, so to speak, knowing my kids, knowing my community. But I absolutely do hold everyone accountable. Do I allow them to write it down? For me, no. I do have a job where I have, for my high flyers, I do have them write some things down to help me or to create a quiz. And I have some models for what that looks like. But I don't let them write anything because I don't want anything in their hands or in their lap. I want them focused on me. And I know I'm going to give them a paper copy. Another question, when students do not follow the rules, do I send them out? My goal is to never send a kid out of the class. So for me, generally speaking, no. I have a lot of different ways to manage disruptions. In instead, I actually use the outlines in a natty, in a natural approach to the year, where I walk over to my rules and I point at them and I smile. And that's been very, very, very effective for my classroom. Audrey asks, how long have I done this? Oh no. Can y'all hear me? We seem to have lost either Martina or me, so I'm really sorry. I'm just going to blame it on Martina's internet this time, not mine.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay.
Yeah, no, my AirPods died, and then I couldn't, and then it messed up my audio. But I'm good. Okay, I'm back. I was like, knock, knock, knock. I have something to say.
Martina, what do you have to say?
So I was going to say with the allowing them to write it down, I agree with Elicia. I would say like 99% of the time I don't allow them to write it down, but of course there have been exceptions over the years where. For whatever reason, and I can't even think specifically of one, but I have allowed a kid to write it down. Sometimes that's kind of an accommodation that students need. So there's different reasons that you could have them take notes. I don't though. And then what was another one that I saw? Oh yeah, how long have we done this? I've been story asking since 2010. And obviously I'm not in the classroom now, but I still moonlight as a story asker.
And I've been doing it since I picked up Somos in October of my first year teaching middle school, which I'm entering my 6th year. So that was 5 years ago. I know, crazy. Yeah. All right, so let's move on. And I am going to talk about how I keep track of details. I have a couple of different ways. And yes, I do ask one student. I'm going to show you what that means. So I also add these procedures for story asking. Once I say something, it's true. Once I've made my statement, it's true. No arguing. It's the only negative rule I have, but I didn't know how to make that positive and be really clear about it. No arguing. Just not tolerated.
So how preposterous and unbelievable that something might be, if you have said it in a statement, it is true and cannot be argued with.
Which is followed by anything is possible in my class. It doesn't matter if I say there's my green frog, it's actually not green, it's blue. Wait, is it blue or is it a different color? And whatever color we decide, that's the color. And then you may make L1 English for our shared language, English suggestions when I cue them. When I cue them, and I have a very specific cue. Will you show the next slide? I think it's the next one.
Yes, the suspense is killing me.
I know. Oh no, I don't have it, it's later. Teach how and when to respond. And that's where the cue comes in. Go ahead.
Someone asked, does it get easier with more practice doing it over again? 100% yes. New CI teacher, there are so many different things. The most important things are the skills. Like, how do I know that my students are understanding? And when I've recognized that they aren't understanding, how do I slow down and communicate with them in a way that they understand? And one of the biggest things is, like Elicia said, those differentiated questions that you can ask about statements. And so those skills are really critical. And then you've got the skills that you're working on, but you've also got like the steps and the procedures of story asking. So it can be a lot, and it does get easier with time. And like we kind of alluded to, story asking is not the easiest strategy for a new CI teacher. It's totally doable. Both of us started with story asking, but it's one of those things that you can kind of look at all the different kinds of activities that you can do, and yourself, you can know, like, in listening to us, like, oh, I could totally handle that, or like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to table that for a month or two, and watch the next week's Somos Summer Fun Club on not story asking.
Because we recognize it's really hard, and some days it's not the right thing, and some classes it's not the right thing. So we're going to talk about how teaching the kids how and when to respond. And I'm bringing this slide back again. Go ahead. Because you have to practice it. You have to give them a chance to learn what to do and practice it. And you cannot accept less than anything less than exactly what you want. Super, super important. Next slide. So this is how I teach my kids to respond. So first, I decided how I want to manage the responses. Am I okay with shout outs? You know what, guys? I'm not. I'm really not okay with shout outs. So for me, this is how I manage my responses. Go ahead. For individual responses, I raise my hand, they raise their hand. This has the great benefit of giving think time. I raise my hand, or I ask the question, class, was there a girl or an animal? Now I've given think time. So I'm asking questions for individual responses.
Sorry, you raising your hand is the cue that you want students to raise their hand to respond.
Exactly. And I teach them that very explicitly. When I raise my hand, it means you raise your hand, and we practice. And if they aren't raising their hand, they're blurting, we reverse. And I say, remember, when I raise my hand, and I do this in English, remember, when I raise my hand, you raise your hand. Go ahead. Go to the next slide.
Ah, there we go.
There it is. Super easy. There's me on my crutch because I was on crutches for 6 months.
Oh.
Next one, when I want a suggestion. So here's how I cue them for English or when I want a suggestion. I raise my hand and I point to a sign. This is downloadable. Okay. They can raise their hand and they can respond one or two words in our shared language. So that just means I need a creative, interesting suggestion for the story. This is a question. So I'm explicitly teaching them when I point to the sign, I don't know what the answer is.
Alicia, I love that. I haven't actually seen that before, where you have a specific sign that you're pointing to cue, like, okay, we don't already know this piece of information. Like, I'm not asking you a comprehension question. I am asking you a fishing question. And so to have a sign for that, I love that.
And it really, really helps at the beginning. By the end of the year, I don't point to the question anymore because they know, I don't point to the sign anymore because they know my tone of voice and they know my body language. But at the beginning, it's absolutely imperative that I let them know whether it's a fishing question or a response question that they already know the answer to.
Mm-hmm. Someone asked if we have a standard written set of questions we use with stories, and I don't, because every story is different. So you're going to be asking different kinds of questions, different questions for every story. But that is something that we could absolutely go through, and if it seems like that would really support teachers, we could write out some questions to accompany each script that would help you in the asking of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we could consider.
Absolutely. I know John Cowart, I think John is watching. Hi, John. Talks about how he explicitly writes out differentiated questions for his faster processors, his slower processors, and his middle processors. And I know when I first started Storyasking, I explicitly wrote out my questions. It really helped me understand what I was trying to do. I don't do that anymore. Now, Silvana's question, what if they never raise their hand, is a great one. And I have a lot of suggestions for that because that's a real thing. What if the kids, I have a colleague who teaches in Korea, and she said that her students will never offer suggestions. So we spent a lot of time brainstorming what would work for her culture. And I have a lot of ideas coming up here soon. So hopefully
Yeah. And
that will
sometimes
help.
you just get a class as well. Like it might not even be a cultural thing, but you just have a specific, like a class culture thing where you have a very quiet class. And I have had those as well.
Absolutely. So managing responses when asking questions for a choral response. Most of the time, I want my kids to respond chorally. It creates community, it creates cohesion, and it reduces the affective filter. Since everybody's opening their mouths, doesn't matter what's coming out, but they feel a little safer because it's choral. And choral response is a very, very good technique for inclusivity and bringing everybody's voice in, even if they're not actually vocalizing.
It allows students to get lost in the crowd, what makes it so safe, and also why it can't be the only thing that we do.
Exactly. So here's how I manage the responses when asking questions for the choral response. We do have a little video. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm just going to model it. So if I say, class, is there a girl? Yes or no? And I do that every single time. And it was really hard to train myself. I learned this from Alina Filipescu, who is a master teacher. And I watched her do it with a group of adults. And I realized that for me was the missing piece, was training the kids how and when to respond. So again, it really is that simple. Or if I want an individual response.
And I don't do the countdown, but you know, when I ask a yes or no question, I always what do? I go see or no, and then I ask and get the response. And if it's either or, I go like this with my hands, and then lean in. So I do the leaning in, but not the countdown.
And it's totally up to you. Yeah. For those of you who may be teaching languages that have different forms of yes or no, like Mandarin Chinese or Hawaiian or all kinds of languages where Hebrew, which is another language in my school, where yes and no are not familiar, cueing a question with yes or no before asking it is a really, really helpful way to let the kids know what you want them to respond. Oh, it's this kind of question. Same with using gestures. It's just another way to support comprehension and make sure that they're all with you, because that's our goal. At the end of the day, we want them to understand everything we're saying. Okay, and this video isn't up, but I can pop it up there. I saw that somebody didn't find the handout, and it's possible that I screwed up the bit.ly link. I'm sorry about that.
They found the website. So that link takes you to a website page, and on the website page, I believe there's 3 links. One of them is the handout, and it's labeled as such. One of them is a video, and then the other one was another handout.
It's the observation sheet. Do I teach them the procedures before I do my first story ask? I start it from the minute they walk in. I do, because these are the procedures I use for everything, not just story asking. So if we're talking about a news article from Mundo en Tus Manos, these are the same procedures that I use. When we get to story asking, I just add on the, you can answer in English if I cue you and suggest cued answers, which maybe isn't up there. Does that help?
When and what I do is I set up a couple of rules first, a couple of procedures, and that is for when I say something or when I ask you a question, I need you to respond. So I need to know that you're picking up what I'm putting down, and then also I need you to signal it if you don't understand. So I set that up. And then and then when it gets to the details part, when it comes time for me to ask my first detail, then I'll explain that kind of a thing. So I kind of explain the procedures as they appear for the first time in story asking. But whichever way you do it, whether you do them a big load up front or if you trickle them in, it is so important that you establish them very explicitly, clearly, and in English, and then that you reinforce them in English until your students really get them, because otherwise your year will be miserable every time you try to story ask.
And it's too much fun, in my opinion, to not try it. So even if it seems like a lot, try it. It's so fun. All right, I think we're moving on to how do we decide the details? So one of the hardest part about story asking is figure out how to decide the details. Everyone is in the same boat, guys. For whether you have a million people blurting out or nobody raising their hand, it's hard no matter what. So here's some ideas. First of all, it's okay to look something up. It's okay to refuse a suggestion. It's okay to set guidelines. No murders. Come on. Whatever works for you. It's okay to not know all the words. So I want to release you from that, okay? You don't need to know everything. My Spanish was not great when I started. It's gotten better, partially through having to manage this process. Mm-hmm. So there's ways that you can decide the details that require no prep. You ask a question and you have a student actor decide. That's one of my favorites because it really lets the actor own the story. But what if you aren't ready to use an actor? That's okay. You can have a class expert. You decide that Martina is the class expert in color of shirts. And I even saw this week, somebody gives them like a sign that says expert. Mm-hmm. And they decide if the shirt is blue or red, if that's the detail that you're deciding.
If you have a class expert, it has to be someone who is very confident. I heard Cecilia talking about this last week, because if they choose something that some kids in the class didn't want them to choose, they need to be confident enough that if those kids kind of give them some flack about it, it's not going to really affect them emotionally.
Absolutely. So again, choose your people, like know who your kids are, which is a whole nother webinar, I think. Yeah. Another one that's my favorite, you can vote, okay, is the shirt blue or is the shirt white? If it's blue, raise your hand. Or my favorite, if the shirt is blue, run to the door. If the shirt is white, jump 3 times. It's a little brain break. Everyone votes, and they're too busy doing the thing to notice what actually won. So that's another great one. Those work for me because I have a lot of brain breaks. Those may or may not work for you, but these are all different ideas. Here's another set of ways to decide details. Ooh. As the teacher, my favorite word in Spanish is almost. Like, that's a great suggestion, almost, but not quite. It's a very kind way of negating a suggestion. You can do the great yell where everyone yells it out. You say, what color shirt is it? And then you pretend to hear purple, which is always hilarious. You can say, no, class, the shirt is neither blue nor purple. I have a secret. And you just tell them, the shirt is orange. Or you just decide, like, is it blue? Nope. Is it white? Nope. It's orange. Moving on. Right?
Yeah. And these are all things that, and actually this just happened to me at IFLT last week, that you start asking in the class for details, and the kinds of details that they're giving you are not the kind of details that are going to help move the story forward and stay with the script. Or they're not suggestions that you're going to be able to keep comprehensible, or they're just boring and no one is going to be interested enough in them. Then, like Elicia said, having the great yell, just pretending that you heard something. So no one actually said it, but you're like, yes, just like back toward the, the back of the room. You just kind of like point in a general direction. Yes, the shirt is orange. Okay. And they'll just think that someone else said it. Or like she said, with having a secret, you have everybody lean in. And you're like, I have a secret. Come,
and you have everyone stand up and huddle around, and then you just tell them something. But because you pretended like it was this big secret, it's more interesting than if you just were like, okay, we're shutting it down. I'm just telling you.
Now, for some people, somebody mentioned that they're not a good actor. I totally get that. Some teachers who story ask are big personalities. I am a big personality when I'm in front of my class. I'm actually an introvert. Other people are very quiet. It's a big secret. Other people are very quiet and very zen and might say, class, is the shirt orange or blue? Nope, the shirt is blue, and move on. Right? It's up to them.
I remember a friend of mine in Anchorage, Victoria, she's a Japanese teacher, and she has just the most wonderful smile and smiling eyes, and she has a very quiet voice, and when she does story asking, she's just kind of like smiling in front of the class the whole time, but her voice never really goes up or down, but her quiet demeanor draws her in. Like I always find myself when I'm in a lesson that she's teaching, I'm just leaning in because she's so welcoming and inviting, and also almost just to hear because she's quieter. So you don't have to be a good actor. You don't have to have a very loud personality to be a dynamic storyteller.
Awesome. All right, let's move on to the things that you can do if you don't have kids who want to give suggestions or you're not comfortable with that. So these are all things that require some prep. You need to go through the details and decide what they are and come up with either generally categories. So in the handout, I have linked from a really great blog post using story cubes, which you can buy at Target or on Amazon. This time of year is a great time to find them at Target. From Annabelle Williamson. I forgot to change her name. So you decide on the categories and students write it on the cube. So you say, okay, restaurants in town, colors of shirt, and animals. And you just roll it to decide. It's very easy, it's very fast, and it's very positive. It does require prep. So just know that. The next one is written suggestions in a hat. You decide on the categories and have students write suggestions on slips of paper. You put them in different hats or bags or boxes, and you pull them from the hats to decide. This is actually included in Unit 17, El Viajero in Somos. And this is a great way to decide the different things that happen. I really enjoy this one. Next, Foursquare class suggestions. This is from Lori Clark. And before you start the story, you choose 4 categories and have the class brainstorm ideas before starting. Generally speaking, I would do this in English to make it fast, but not always. The next one is Mad Libs. Students fill out a form and create their own version of the story, and then you can use their ideas, because they've already written them down, to co-create a shared story. If you go to the next slide, this is actually from Collab Drive. So there's a girl's name, there's a feminine adjective, a class, and a boy's name. And then you can either take the top half and use that to decide details, or every kid writes their own version. Those are different ways to do it. Next, there's more. This one's awesome. Chalk Talk. My kids hands down voted this as their favorite way to story ask, which surprised me so much. So Annabelle Williamson, again, has a very amazing blog post that includes different ways to differentiate with this activity, and it's fantastic. But basically, you use big paper, you put a category at the top of all the papers, and then the kids write suggestions in the categories, and then you use those papers to decide, and it's pretty amazing.
I would agree with that. That has historically been my best way to get quiet classes talking in story asking, and then also with personalized questions and answers. And I blogged about that before too, and we'll definitely drop the link. But yes, huge vote for that one.
It's pretty amazing. And then you can use a digital spinner if you've got something that projects. You just put the categories in, and it's called Wheel Decide, and you just spin it. That's kind of cool, but again, it takes a lot of prep. And what's next?
I don't know.
All right.
And I'll say one other one, Elicia, that I've done is having students draw answers, and that's in a Somos 2 unit. I brought that in. But if you have just a quieter class, having them illustrate their responses instead of saying them has worked for me as well.
That's awesome. I love that. All right. So any comments or questions about how do you decide details? All right.
Voting is, you talked about the voting, so I just wanted to come back to that. I saw Cecile do this with one-word images at IFLT last week, where she came up with 3 options ahead of time for everything, and then she just had the class vote on one. And so you still get student buy-in, but there's a little bit more control to it, and that worked really well.
So what about using dry erase boards was one question. Yeah. Absolutely, for drawing, for writing. If you have a class that is either super silent or really, really loud, you can have them write things on the dry erase boards and show them. I love using my dry erase boards. Silvana asked, what are some examples of categories? So in the script, the details that you would decide, so names, those are the things that are underlined. So in Somos 1, Unit 2, the details are the name of the character, the gender of the character, and a characteristic of the character. So those would be my categories. Girls' names, so I'd probably just say girls' names, and characteristics, like personality traits. And I'm glad.
I saw just at IFLT again last week, Elicia, when I came to observe the teaching lab that you were in with your crew, Elicia was co-teaching a lab with 3 other teachers, and they had posters all around the room that had famous people on them, places, and I believe those were kind of general. They weren't connected to a specific story.
Mm-hmm.
However, you could very easily do that same thing just for each story. So whatever kinds of things you're going to be looking for in the story, those are your categories.
And I see somebody mentioned that they have a student call another teacher. Sarah Breckley is famous for this. She'll call the principal. She'll call her husband. I've been known to call my husband to decide a detail. I've been known to call the principal also after attending. I've been known to send a kid next door and ask another teacher. Just depends on how wild I'm feeling and wild they're feeling and our level of comfort.
All of those things are going to inject novelty, are going to make it feel like a different experience each time you do it, even though you're still doing the same thing. And those are all creating memories. I just loved, I remember in 8th grade, I had 2 teachers that kind of had they were always picking on each other or referencing each other in class. And I have such fond memories of that year because of their relationship. And so those kinds of things are so fun to pull in.
All right, why don't we move on? And I want to talk about kind of the technical details, keeping track of the stories, managing. So first, tracking and writing stories. This is really important. You need to have a system. I'm going to show you what my system is because it's easy to manage and it works for my brain. So this is just in my head. This is how I do it. Go ahead. First, I use kids to keep track of stories. So there's your question. I have a dedicated notebook. The student copies off the board. I actually write the details on the board because I have a terrible short-term memory. I'll forget if I don't write. I'll mix the names up. Like it's fine. I use bullet points when I write on the board. They can use bullet points or full sentences. I use it for my faster processors or my heritage learners if they want to do it. I never force a kid to do it. That really, really helps. And I have a handout available to download, linked on the handout, with the directions that I give. Like I have a little piece of paper with the notebook for the story writer, and it says very explicitly what I want them to do.
I always tried to have a story writer. I always had a story writer at the beginning of the year, and I had a story writer notebook, and then I just had a hard time sticking with that routine. But I agree, it is worth it to make yourself stick with it.
It really helps, and if you find the right kid, it's
Yes.
magical.
Yes.
Because then they do it even if you forget, and you can rely on them, and they're great. The
Definitely.
next thing that I do is I use my whiteboard. Go ahead. This is super important. When I story ask, my whiteboard is blank.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts blank and it starts divided in half. Will you show the next slide? On one side, I have the core vocabulary. Oh, this is a PDF, so it's not all pretty and blown up. But on one side, I have the core vocabulary. So in this, it's runs, walks, and sees. And I also have the U form and the I form, so that if my actor wants to try to use those, or if I want to triangle, which if you've been to a GPRS books workshop, that information is right there for them. And then any words come up, like if they went to Mars and I want to write out Mars, I'm going to put that on this side. So that's just the vocabulary side of the board. This works for me. On the other side, I have the details of the story, what the names of the characters are, if they have a gender or if they're an animal, important things to remember when I go to type it up. And this is what I have the kid copy. What I found for me is taking the time to write this on the board gives kids processing time. And they need it. And I need it. And it gives me a chance to think about where to go next. I've done this with paper. I've done this on traditional chalkboards, and I've done this on a whiteboard. I've also done it on a document camera. So it just depends. Next.
I have the vocabulary part of my board is pretty structured, and I can share that. I keep thinking I need to make a video about it. But I was super fortunate. I had so many whiteboards in my room. So I had, like if you're looking at the front of my room, I had my document, or I had my projector, my Promethean board. And then to the right of it, I had my vocabulary area. And then to the left of it, I had this is where I write up everything else area. And then over on the side of my room, I had 2 more whiteboards. It was like whiteboard heaven. That I wrote all the class things out. But I agree, having a place to write out these details and keeping it separate from vocabulary. So whether it's on the same board and separating out that space, or having it on a piece of like the flip chart paper is so helpful.
Mm-hmm. So what about typing it up and projecting it? I do that when I do a write and discuss, and I have a link of Martina talking about that. I believe it's in the slideshow or in the handout. I don't want to get behind my computer when I'm teaching as much as possible. I don't want to separate myself. I want to be present. So that's my decision. Mm-hmm. And I don't want the kids to get lost in reading while we're telling the story. For me, the reading is a separate step. I want to really inhabit the story. Again, that's my personal preference, because to me, the story is the key and the reading is what makes them better later. So this is a picture of what my board actually looks like at the end of a very long, complicated story. I think this maybe was from Somos 2, Unit 2. I can't really tell.
7.
But if you can, Unit 7. So I've got a ton of text because a lot of details are in that. It's one of the more complex stories. And I've got all of the other words that came up. So to jump isn't in, it's an out of bound word. It's not a common word. I wanted to write it down. Pesadilla, nightmare, was one that I wanted to add so they could see it. And here's just another example of what it looks like. I have terrible handwriting, so that's fine. How long does one story take? As long as you want. I try not to let it last more than an hour, but if it's a really good story, I will milk it for as long as I can.
I had the most success when I do a full story in one period, but in order to do that, I really need to clear out that period of everything else. So if it's a good story, the momentum can carry over to the next day, but I can't always count on the fact that the students are going to be super into the story. So just to be safe, my class periods were between 45 and 55 minutes, and I would block out a full period for story asking. And usually that was sufficient for me.
Likewise, my stories are better when they only take a class period consistently, but sometimes they're great stories and we play with them and we live in them and it's fine. This is the key. Whether or not you finish a story, take a picture. We all have cameras. We all have cameras now, and it's a beautiful thing. Use them, because that will capture everything that you need. Go ahead and go to the next one. So now is the time to write it up. So you've asked the story, maybe you finished it, maybe you haven't. This is a really important step because you need the story for all of the activities that come after it in Somos. You need a paper copy of that story, and there's a couple different ways. Number one, you can use copy paste from the PDF and copy it from the PDF and paste it into a Word doc. Then you can use the find and replace function, and don't forget to proofread it before you print. Believe me, the Find Senora's Errors game is a great game, but probably not one you want to play as often as I do. So that's one really, really easy way to just make a master copy, find and replace, proofread, change the details. It actually doesn't take very long at all. And since you have the details on your phone in a picture, that will really help. The next thing that I recommend is that you write up as much of the story every day as soon as you can. So just so you don't forget. I once forgot to do that, and I changed the ending of the story, and my kids revolted. They were so angry at me because I forgot a really funny part of the story. I just blanked it, and it was such a big deal. So write it up as every day, as soon as you can. That is a great use of your planning period, or for like a few minutes after school.
For me, I taught 3 sections of Spanish, boom, 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 Spanish 1 in the morning. And then I had my lunch. No, I had planning and then lunch. And so the first thing that I would do in that planning period is try to remember, because I didn't even have time to do it in between each class, to try to remember what it was from those 3 classes. And then I would know right away if I didn't remember. And so either I could find someone from one of those classes and be like, oh, I can't remember. Or I would know that the next day I could pretend that I was very strategic about not remembering. And when I'm asking the class to give me details, like I could say, oh, there was a boy named Barney. And I would know that it was wrong, and I would say it really crazy. And then they would say, no. So.
Yes, the teacher forgetfulness is a really powerful tool, because they will remember. And if it's actually what happens, because I'm super forgetful, it's even more powerful because it's honest.
Yeah. Someone asked how often you do storytelling. There is a story included with almost every Somos unit. So depending on how, on if you are on how quickly you're moving through the units. And you'll know after watching our mindset shift that the purpose of following a curriculum is not the curriculum in and of itself. And so no matter how quickly you move through the materials or how slowly, it's all good. The lesson plans are suggestions. You don't have to go through them in the order that they're written. But if you choose to follow through everything, you know, I would be doing a story usually every week to 2 weeks.
How do you create the story? The stories, I'm just going to say, go back to the beginning because we talk about how they're in the script, and thank you so much for asking. The stories are created, you are adding the specific details for the story. Could you have 3 separate tabs up for each period? Absolutely. If you want to type it up, by all means. That doesn't work for me. Can we go to the next slide? So write and discuss. I think if you click through, it's just a template that I made in really big font on a Google Doc. And that's how I do a write and, no, I'm sorry, that is a link to Martina doing a write and discuss, which is super, super useful.
And maybe Sam put that into the comments.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of questions, are there more questions? These are the questions that tend to come up all of the time. What do you do with a class that is super unruly? Well, that's where you have to practice, teach your procedures, practice your procedures, and only accept what you want. It's a ton of work. I don't disagree. It's really hard. What are some other questions? Keeping track of story details. We talked about how I do it. What are some other questions you guys have?
Well, I'll say that as you have, does the slideshow keep going? Oh yeah, almost.
No, I think that's it.
I would say we are almost at the 1.5 hour mark. Gosh, we always make these so dang long.
So sorry.
Sorry, not sorry. But we'll kind of wrap it up. And if you have questions moving forward, please do drop them in the comments. We are monitoring everything from the Summer Fun Club and responding to questions as they come up. We really want these to be a tool that you can watch again and again if you need to, and that you can share with other people, you know, in your departments. If your whole department, as your colleagues see the amazing things that you're doing and want to know more about it, we really want these to be a tool for you.
And remember, if this isn't your jam, if you do not feel okay about asking stories, it's okay. Mm-hmm. Next week, we're going to talk about all of the things that you can do instead of asking the story. This is one way to get a lot of compelling, understood or comprehended input into your classroom and really create community. So.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that you know, you can tell hopefully from listening to me and Elicia that we both love story asking. It's a fit for both of us. And we recognize that it isn't going to be a fit for everyone, even after they've really figured out how to do it well. And that's okay. You have to be you. You've got to operate in your wheelhouse. And so that's why we planned for next week the not story asking kind of response to this week's Summer Fun Club, so that you can feel confident jumping into the year, knowing that you're maybe not going to be doing story asking.
All right, so we're going to call it, and we'll respond to comments as they come up. Thank you all so much for joining us and spending your summer learning to grow with us. We really appreciate it. Have a wonderful afternoon.
All right, until next week. Next week will also be at 1 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday. And again, you can go back and watch the beginning of this video, but if you are looking for credit for professional development hours, not credit, but hours, there's a form, we posted the link before, we'll post it again, that you can fill out after you watch each video in this summer, in the summer collab series. And that will, if all your district needs is just a certificate saying that you spent X number of hours this summer, that'll suffice for that. But it's not like official credit for any, it's not from any university or anything, just from us.
All right, guys, have a great afternoon.
Okay.
Bye.
Toodle.